Some of the most memorable faces in gaming weren't even in direct control by a player. Characters like Elizabeth, Naru, Ashley Graham, or Navi are all examples of those who have cemented their place within the annals of gaming's history because of how they elicited an emotional response from the player in ways that went above and beyond their roles on paper. Evocation of powerful enough reactions to a character so as to be remembered for years to come can be the result of who they were or what their relevance was to how their game played. For me, when the topic of indelible supporting characters arises, I always lean towards Elizabeth, wonderfully brought to life by actress Courtney Draper. Elizabeth is an example of the former, someone whose story and performance throughout its telling was strong enough to reserve a special spot in my memory. Navi, on the other hand, is a character who lives on not only due to her overeager and oft annoying curiosity, but to her impact on gameplay. Z-targeting revolutionized the way developers approach real-time 3D melee combat, and its association with Navi ensured her place within the hearts and minds of gamers everywhere. We remember to listen because she helped us kick ass. I chose those two examples specifically to illustrate a point. Elizabeth and Navi possess stark contrasts in design and appear in games of vastly different graphical fidelity. However, both exhibit the same amount of personality, strengthening the bond they share with the player. And that is the point. You can express a lot with very little. Today, we take a look at a short title that does manage to express powerful bonds of trust and friendship with relatively little, capitalizing on senses of wonder and mystery to strengthen those ties. Through broken glasses, we look at Unspokin. I don't usually cover games in a way that directly highlights the itch.io storefront. Oftentimes, the platform is used as a vehicle to deliver me early code before the developer moves on to something like Steam. The fact can't be ignored, however, that aspiring developers use itch.io as a way to debut new concepts, ideas, or demos, and while popular YouTubers like Jim Sterling might spend time lambasting the awful and grotesque, which is fine and his prerogative, I feel time is better spent on highlighting the beautiful and intriguing, titles that are anything but perfect, but are moving very much in the right direction. I've been following Five Horsemen Games and their game Unspokin for a few months now. I first saw their title art and became interested because it, and the game's narrative, struck me as very Studio Ghibli-esque in style and tone. The story takes place in the land of Arden, a series of floating islands suspended by great metal chains that disappear into the misty clouds, obscuring their anchors from the people below. The land is lush and beautiful, but presently at danger. Deforestation caused by industrialization has rendered much of Arden inhospitable. The localized cutting down and burning of its forests has made the air toxic with carbon monoxide, unfortunately causing irreparable brain damage to a small girl in particular, Karen. Suffering from aphasia, or the loss of the ability to understand or express speech, Karen nonetheless decides to do something to try and restore life to her homeland. This, in turn, brings her to Killian, a blind bear. From this point forward, the game is all about the developing relationship between Karen and Killian and their ability to work together. Returning now to how the game struck me as being very Studio Ghibli-esque, Hayao Miyazaki's films always possess powerful examples of friendship and love within the fantasy worlds he creates, with those relationships typically strained by those who can be described as existing outside of the nuanced emotional connections that are felt between his main characters. The parallels to Unspokin and its man versus nature narrative were easy to draw. Gameplay centers around first getting Killian to trust you, at which point he will proceed to follow you, heeding the call of your whistle and stopping wherever you'd like him to in the interest of, say, holding down a pressure plate while you solve a corresponding puzzle. He can do other things that Karen can't, such as push heavy objects and create pathways across obstacles. The relationship dynamic between Karen and Killian revolves around maintaining that trust. As Unspokin is more so a proof of concept than a full game in the strongest sense of the word, this mechanic is explored on a rudimentary level. There are scripted moments in which Killian loses faith in the player, perhaps because he was led through a thorn bush or into a bear trap, and trust is only restored upon feeding him fish that are scattered seemingly arbitrarily around the area. There is no meter by which to gauge the level of Killian's confidence in you. His appreciation for the fish and stroking of his fur, the latter appearing to service role-playing needs rather than gameplay, is expressed with audio-visual cues. Killian is made purposefully disobedient in the middle portion of the game, in which there aren't enough fish to restore his trust in you. At this point, you're taught that you can still physically guide him by hand, and it is here the importance of your relationship is demonstrated, as you must act quickly before he wanders off on his own accord. The debate as to whether or not it's best for your game to simulate all aspects of an animal's behavioral personality is an interesting one, most recently brought up with the release of Team Ico's The Last Guardian, from which I'm sure Unspokin took inspiration. Admittedly, I haven't played The Last Guardian just yet, a disservice I feel I'm doing to myself as a huge Shadow of the Colossus fan. But I like to think that I would, in the end, place more value on an experience with an animal companion who demonstrated the same sort of behavioral complexity as their real-world counterpart than I would on an experience where they always did what I instructed without question. In games such as this, I think it's a question of what you want players to ultimately take away from their experience. The relationship between your characters and your world, or your gameplay. Both are important, of course, but more often than not, I find one ends up complementing the other, and rarely are they on equal footing. Once again, I return to BioShock Infinite as an example of a title that I remember not for its gameplay, which was arguably the weakest of the franchise, but for the city of Columbia and the relationship between Booker DeWitt and Elizabeth.
Why? What could be better than this?
And that's what I found the most interesting about Unspokin, its world. The islands of Arden are beautiful, and bearing witness to the great chains suspending them in the sky as I traversed the land actually made me reminisce about similar feelings of majesty experienced while playing Santa Monica Studios' epic God of War 2. Where are those chains anchored? Who was cutting down the forests and operating the machinery? Where have all the other displaced inhabitants of Arden gone? Who or what blinded Killian and scarred his face? What is the nature of the power Karen possesses over her homeland? This is all just a preview of things to come, as Five Horsemen Games hints as much by the end. Overall, I was pleased with my experience, with minor criticisms revolving around a wonky camera when controlled with the mouse, and bear traps that seemed only to pop into existence after Killian stepped on them. Unspokin is a fine start to what could be an emotionally engaging tale of love and friendship within a beautiful and mysterious world. If Five Horsemen Games goes the route of depicting realistic animal behavior in the interest of building a memorable relationship, then I hope it's done so more naturally than what I found here. Feeding Killian fish to raise an internal trust meter felt too gamey, and I'd like it if confidence was built perhaps over a longer period of time. It'd be interesting, for example, if in the beginning something was forcing you two to stay together, but nonetheless apart, as Killian would otherwise attack if you got too close. He's a blind bear, after all. You can check out Unspokin for yourself in the links below, and if you want to stay up to date on all the latest indie games, be sure to subscribe to the channel as well as follow me on Twitter @BrokeGlasses. My name's Kevin Ryan, and thanks for watching.